Welcome, everyone. I am Bob Wurzelbacher, the director of the Respect Life Office for the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, and this is our video podcast series that we call Being Pro-Life. Each month, we'll discuss a different topic in the Respect Life arena. We'll hear a personal story from someone deeply affected by that issue, and finally, we'll share ways that you can get involved. This week, we're talking about carrying a child to term after receiving a terminal diagnosis. As always, we have a special guest. Will you please introduce yourself?
I am Maria Lees Dunlap. I am the mother of soon-to-be 9 children. 7 of them are here on earth, and I have 2 of them in heaven. I am the CEO and founder of ReViv Family Support Foundation, and I'm really excited to be a part of this topic with all of you this week.
Thanks so much, Maria, for spending time with us today. Why don't you start by sharing with us your story?
Absolutely. I'd love to share our story. My husband and I, we got married in 2010 and found out we were pregnant at the end of that year. It was so exciting. It was going to be the first grandchild on my side of the family. And we were very excited to share with everybody the news at Christmas. And we did that. And then the countdown started for our 20-week ultrasound, where even though I'd been around children and babies my entire life, I just thought we went for the 20-week ultrasound to find out the gender of our baby. And I was so excited to find out if it was a girl or a boy and to really start planning for this miracle to come into our lives and for our lives to be changed in a way that I had always dreamed of being a mom. We went to the doctor's appointment and went back for the ultrasound. And I remember the first thing the tech asked us was, "Are you going to find out the sex of the baby today?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, what else do you do?" And she said, "Well, there's a lot of other really important things we do. We do a whole anatomy scan." And I was like, "Oh, okay, that sounds fine." And shortly after she started rubbing over my belly, she said, "Well, congratulations, your baby is a girl." And I was just elated beyond measure. I had secretly been hoping that we would be having a girl. I just was so excited to think about dressing her up and immediately laying on that table in the few seconds of finding out that our baby was a little girl. Just my mind was racing of seeing, her being born, her doing her first dance recital, her prom, her wedding, like all of these things just flashing through my eyes of what my life was going to be like. And before I could even really relish all of those dreams, the ultrasound tech said, "There's something really significantly wrong with her heart. We need to have the doctor come in." And it was like my whole world just shattered in those moments. I didn't know what that meant or what that could mean, but I just kept thinking like, well, her heart is kind of an important organ. And if there's something wrong with it, that's probably not a good sign. And so my just joy went to real trouble and worry really instantaneously. I felt like this really joyous moment of my life was taken from me, which was really hard. And the doctor came in and said, "There is something wrong with her heart. It looks like she has something called Hypoplastic left heart syndrome, or we shorten it to HLHS, which is where one of the chambers in her heart didn't form the way it was supposed to, which can allow the heart not to function the way it needs to." And I just remember everything going blank and just kind of going numb. Like, what do you mean? This what? Like, there were so many questions and so many words coming at me that it was just all I really took from that ultrasound was that I was having a baby girl that had something very significantly wrong with her heart. And luckily, the next day we had another in-depth ultrasound, which confirmed her diagnosis. And we were able to talk a little bit more about what our plan was going to be for our daughter, whom we named Vivian. And we learned really quickly that HLHS by itself is not a death sentence. And for me, I really held on hope that there was an answer to solve her problem, that there is a 3-part surgery that could be done, that there are a lot of kids that have these surgeries and medical technology has come so far that they're living pretty normal, long lives, and that we didn't have to be afraid of what wasn't going to happen, that we could still have joy and hope and dreams of what our life was going to be like with Vivian. We had weekly doctor's appointments, and it seemed as though as time went on that there were more and more questions that the doctors left with. I remember one day in particular, our cardiologist came in and she just said, there's something in her belly. There's this fluid that's not going away. We're not really sure what it is. The only way that we'd be able to tell is if we did a procedure where they would actually, in utero, they would stick this long needle in and like suck some of it out and biopsy it. But the problem was it was a very invasive surgery and it wasn't going to change our outcome for Vivian. So we chose not to do that so that we were able to continue to make sure that she was safe inside of my stomach and getting as much time as she needed to grow and be as healthy and viable as possible for when she was going to be delivered. But I also remember on that day when she came in and she was telling me this, that she was very concerned, the doctor that was very concerned about this fluid and just what was going on. I remember laying on this exam table and just having this overwhelming sense of peace just come over me. And I felt the voice of God just really pierce my heart at that moment and tell me, I'm allowing this all to happen so that Vivian will be able to show my glory. And for me at that moment, I really felt like he was going to completely heal her heart and she was going to be born and it was going to be this huge miracle. And we'd be leaving the hospital with this healthy baby. And it was going to be, one of those stories that you read about. And I held on to that hope of just knowing that regardless of what happened, that God was with us and that he loved Vivian more than I could ever love her. And so that there's just a whole lot of love that was surrounding us by God our Father. And we were so very blessed to have so much support of family and friends too, as we went through this whole process. Well, it came time for Vivian to be born on July 24th of 2012. And it was a very bittersweet day. I remember coming back from the doctor. I was about a week and a half out from my due date. I had gone to the doctor for a check and I was already starting labor. And the doctor was honestly a little nervous. And so he had suggested that we just go in to make sure that everything was okay, that Vivian would be born in the hospital and able to immediately receive the things that she needed to be able to have her heart function before her surgeries. And I remember calling my mom on the way home from the doctor's office and just saying, well, today's the day we're going to go. And I just remember her asking me, well, how do you feel about that? And I just started crying because on one hand, this was supposed to be the most exciting day of my life. It was a moment that I had waited for forever to be a mom. I couldn't wait. I had always wanted to be a mom. But on the other hand, there were so many unknowns of what was going to happen once my baby was born. And I knew that she was safe inside my womb, but I didn't know if she was going to have that same safety after she was born. And that was really scary as a mom. And so our time came to go to the hospital and, reality was hitting us in the face. We couldn't keep her in any longer. And she was born on July 24th, early in the morning. And it was such a beautiful moment because my whole world changed in a matter of a moment. And I think anybody that's had a child, whether it be through your body, it be adopting a child, it be however you become a parent and meet that child for the first time, is that your world has changed forever in that moment. And it was such a sacred moment. And I look back and I think about all the gifts that God gave us in that moment. Vivian was pink and screaming, which the doctors had told us she'd be blue and would have to be taken right from us. I was able to hold her for a few minutes before they did have to take her. And we had all these little gifts that we were anticipating that we weren't going to have. We were lucky enough to have a really good family friend who's a priest there on that day when she was born. And he came and he baptized her before they took her from the hospital I delivered to Children's Hospital. I look back and all things considered, this moment that I'd been building up to of her being born, I was so afraid of that moment, but it ended up being just this really amazing experience in the way that it was. Every birth story is so different, and hers was very different, but very beautiful. On that day when my husband left with her to go to the hospital, that's when our journey with her diagnosis really started. we went to Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and we were there for 59 days. And during those 59 days at the hospital, my husband and I had so much support from family and friends. Because of that, we were able to really just take our whole focus onto Viv. Everything that we did every single day was for her and about her. We were able to love her for a lifetime in those 59 days. And they were a very beautiful 59 days. And they were a very, very sad 59 days. There were a lot of ups and downs. It was a definite roller coaster. It was very difficult to have a whole bunch of different doctors come in and tell you a whole bunch of different things and trying to put together pieces and really outweighing the hope versus optimism of the situation. But every day that we got to spend with Viv was a real blessing. And 3 days after she was born, we found out that she actually had a chromosomal defect called Turner syndrome. It's the absence of one X chromosome, so it only happens in females. And it is on a spectrum. It could be so severe that the baby doesn't live past the first trimester. And it could be as benign is not the right word, but as, you just don't really know your daughter has it until it's time for her to start puberty and she's not growing in the right way. And there's a whole lot of complications in the middle. What was absolutely amazing was that the day that they came in and they told us that that was her diagnosis, was Turner syndrome. It wasn't actually HLHS. HLHS was a product of the Turner syndrome. Is they told us that she should not have lived past the first trimester, that all of the complications that they saw in her, they had never seen a live baby because she shouldn't even be alive and breathing room air, that she already was a miracle. And I remember thinking back to that day in the doctor's office and realizing that God's glory was being shown because she was alive and she was already beating a lot of odds, but that this child that I loved and I felt like was my heart outside of my chest laying in this hospital bed, that ultimately she was his, and that I had to be willing to give her back to him if I was going to be able to fully love her while she was here. I think about when Jacob was wrestling with God and he comes out, his hip, he has like this limp, but he has his hip. And that's a lot of how I felt, is that after just all this wrestling with God about what my life was going to be and how I wanted it, of kind of coming out and realizing that probably the easier thing to really cherish the time that we had, because I didn't know how long or what was going to happen, was to really just surrender her to him. And in that surrendering, I do believe there's a lot of grace that came because I was able to be fully present for her. I was able to love her. I was able to really be open to how God was working in our life. And I look back on that time where it was me, my husband, and Vivian in our B616 of Children's Hospital. That was our home. And that was where something inside of me changed for the better, that I realized Vivian made me who I am. She made me a mom. And in making me a mom, God was able to open up a part of my heart that I didn't know was closed and that needed to be opened. And so, but it had to be done in the way that she was able to do it. It had to be done through the suffering. And I'm so thankful for that. We learn in our faith that there is so much joy in the suffering and the cross. Don't get me wrong, having my child be sick and die was absolutely terrible and I hate it. But there is a lot of grace that's able to come through that time. And I really feel like that was one of the greatest gifts that God was able to give us through Viv. That the greater gift was that her life was able to help me become more fully who I needed to be. And so many other people were brought so much closer to God through her life because of how he worked through us, because how we opened ourselves to allowing him to work through us. That if we believe that we are a body of Christ, that the things that happen to us aren't always just for us. They're for us to share in this mystical phenomena of all being connected and needing to help support each other.
So Maria, thank you so much for sharing your story. I didn't want to interrupt, but gosh, I have so many questions that I could start with. You mentioned the diagnosis, by the way, earlier. It was misdiagnosed, I guess, as a heart condition that wasn't necessarily terminal. So that's what you believed at the time of the pregnancy. But nonetheless, was there suggestions from the hospital or the doctor to have an abortion at that point because of the prognosis, or that was not the case with you?
Our practice at the time when we received the diagnosis, the doctor kind of went through all of our options, but there were many more pro-life people that went to this doctor specifically for that reason. So it was never something that was brought up in a way that was pressured for us to have an abortion. We did have a family friend who's a scientist, and she did have one of her colleagues say it's so inhumane that they would think that having her is the best option. That baby is only going to suffer. It's only going to have a very tragic life of being this medical, phenomenon. What's the point in that? And it's really interesting, Bob, because for me, it was the first time in my life that I realized that even that person who had thought that abortion was the better option, that it wasn't out of malice for my child. Right. It was really out of concern for her and what her life was going to be. And that really opened my brain. I kind of had this oh my gosh, that people that a lot of times choose abortion or advocate for abortion aren't bad people and don't actually have these bad intentions. It's that they're misguided. They don't understand the value of every human life and that there is value in suffering. And that for me was more sad, is that this person, it was out of love, I believe, that they thought that was the best option, but they didn't understand the real gift that we have in our life. And that really was a mind shift for me, is to kind of look at people with more compassion when that's their knee-jerk reaction to the situation. Because I think too, Vivian's life, although it was 59 days, she changed the world. I mean, through the changes in me, through being able to see so many families that don't receive the support that they need in the hospital, we were able to start our nonprofit. And through that, we've worked with over 6,000 families. I mean, it's really a ripple effect. And that's just one life that if it was somebody else, maybe they would have thought it's a life not worth living out of sake for them and what their life's going to be. But in reality, all that suffering has made a huge impact and wave for so many people. So
I know what you're talking about when you were talking about God's plan, when you had that moment where God said, my glory is going to be shown through Vivian, and you interpreted that as meaning she would be healed physically, right, and born fine. I've had similar experiences, not like that, but I mean, where God spoke very clearly to me and I misinterpreted what that meant, right? Yep. So I know what you're talking about, right? Maybe you can share a little more. How is it that God's glory, right, showing God's glory, right, was shown so much in Vivian and might be different from what we at first think is the best way that God can show his glory? Because we always think that means some kind of miraculous healing. That's what God's glory is about, but it's so much more than that. And how is it that her short life really showed God's glory?
I think so often about this because for me, one of the greatest things that Viv taught me was this lesson, is that God's, that cliche, the Garth Brooks songs of some of God's greatest gifts are unanswered prayers, right? But I feel like that's very true, is that for us as humans, we can't see things the way God sees them. And we are all so connected. And I don't believe that God does things just to do them. They're not random. And God doesn't want the suffering that happens in our world, right? But he permits it because we can grow from it. We're broken human beings, and some of this we brought onto ourselves. So it is sometimes God's greatest gift to allow us to go through some of the suffering. And, I think as far as Vivian goes, and my real conversion with her through mistaking what God's glory was going to be, was that two things on a very practical level. Was when Viv was in the hospital, because of the support that we received, it was very evident very quickly that we were the exception to the rule, that families would not be able to be present for their child. I would listen to babies cry all day long, every single day, and not have one person come into the room to see them. We had listened to parents that would be very stressed out about going home because they weren't sure how they were going to afford the gas for follow-up appointments. How are they going to afford childcare now that they have a medically fragile child at home and they can't have their other kids at home all day, every day? Really real problems these families were really facing. For me at that point, I would listen to these and be like, oh my gosh, I would give anything to take my baby home. And I know I'm not going to. Like, I just knew I wasn't going to. And I just felt so deeply for them because I didn't want them to have those worries with them going to take their child home. And so very tangibly and practically, even though Vivian died and the glory wasn't through this miraculous healing of her, it was really through being able to see that need and having support that when I left the hospital empty-armed, I'm walking out with my heart full with this desire to do something to help these families because I didn't want any family to feel like they didn't give everything they could for their child if they had to leave the hospital without them. And with the support of family and friends that rallied around me and a crazy desire to do something for these families, we founded our nonprofit ReViv Family Support Foundation. And since our inception in 2014, we have impacted over 6,000 families. And so very tangibly, that is the glory that God wanted to show, was to be able to see this missing link in caring for families. In a more mystical way, I guess, it really set me up moving forward in my life, that my prayer has changed. That when we hear the scripture all the time, ask, knock, and the Lord will give you all the things that you ask. And that's all good and wonderful. But ultimately, my prayer has changed since my experience with Vivian to be, Lord, give me the grace, give so-and-so the grace to accept the circumstances at hand. Because ultimately, God is not sleeping. The things that happen in our life, they're not random and they're not on accident. And he's always listening. But sometimes the best thing for us is something that hurts us. But it's not meant to hurt us and leave us hurting. It's meant to hurt us for us to grow. I believe that. I've lived it. And I believe it so much in the core of my being. That doesn't mean I go peacefully. I wrestle with God still. I fight with him. I tell him I don't think he's doing things the right way. And I will do that probably until I die. But at the end of that, it really is, please just grant us the grace to accept the circumstances and allow us to know that you're always with us. And that truly is the greatest glory that's come out of it, is that understanding of that love that he has for us, that it's unconditional and it's real, but it doesn't necessarily mean it protects us from everything.
All right, so you mentioned your nonprofit, ReViv. Do you want to share that on the screen and tell us just a little bit about it real quick?
Absolutely. ReViv Family Support Foundation is a nonprofit that we started. If you go to ReVivFamilySupport.org, ReViv is just ReViv, FamilySupport.org. You'll be able to see the good work that we're doing because of the experience we had with Vivian after Vivian died. And our whole goal is to be able to provide personalized, practical, and emotional support for families when their child receives a significant medical diagnosis. And how that looks can be very different for every family. As we know, every family is different. And so how we're able to support each family needs to be meaningful for them. When we receive a referral for a family from the social worker, we match them with a family support worker and are able to help identify what those needs are that we're able to help them with, either while they're in the hospital, as they're transitioning home, with siblings, and even very specifically through the bereavement process. And through the bereavement process can be as they're finding out about the diagnosis of their child, whether it be prenatally, whether it be when their child's 3 years old, because there is a death of a dream that happens. Your life is going to change, and the life that you thought your child was going to have is going to change. Or it could be a bereavement in the physical death of your child. And we're able to work with families through all of that. We like to be there as close to the diagnosis of the child as possible, so we're able to build that relationship. But sometimes we don't get there, and that's okay. We just jump in to help when we can and be that support for families so that they know that they're not going through this alone. One of the things that was really helpful for me while I was pregnant with Vivian after finding out her diagnosis was being able to write. And at the time, Facebook was not used as a blog like it is a lot now. I used a blogspot.com address, which I called Vivian, God is Here. And I was able to really journal through my whole process with Vivian. And if anyone who is listening would be interested in hearing more about our story or really following along more with the story as it was happening in real time, this is a great way to know that the feelings you're feeling are really normal and real, and that other people have felt similar things to what you're feeling. And it's very easy to find. It's just viviangodishere.blogspot.com.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about what anyone can do to help someone who's going through this kind of a thing. I mean, if you lose a child, or even if a child lives for some time but has some kind of a sickness or a disease that changes their life, right? There's a grieving process. There's a loss there, because through pregnancy or at the birth, there's all kinds of that you already mentioned. Like you start imagining first communion, you start imagining birthday parties, you imagine a wedding, all these things. And then at some point you realize these things are not going to happen, or perhaps they're going to be very different. So it's not only the loss of a child, it's the loss of all the dreams and expected life of the family that was going to come through this. All these things have changed. So there's great grieving and loss that happened with this. So people are often at a loss. The friends are at a loss. How do I talk? Do I ignore this? How do I talk about it? What do I do if I find out a friend is going through something like this, something in the past or something they're presently going with? What kind of advice do you have for people on how to help a friend who has been or is going through something like this?
There's a lot of ways to be able to be supportive. What I often suggest for people that want to support a friend or family member that has had a poor prenatal diagnosis, that has had a child that's received a diagnosis, or has a child that has died, the last thing you want to do is overwhelm the person who is grieving with, how can I help? Open-ended questions are really not helpful. If you're able to say, I really want to help you, can I bring you dinner or bring you coffee? Like, give them two options so that they're able to make a decision. But even at that point, if you had 50 people coming to you and texting you asking that, it can become very overwhelming for the person who's grieving. So if there's a best friend, a mom, a cousin, a sister, whoever that is super close to that person, it doesn't mean that you aren't reaching out to the person who's grieving, still sending a text, letting them know you're thinking about them, praying for them, a song that really was speaking to you that you wanted to share with them, a Bible passage, like whatever you want to send to them, expecting no response, just allowing them to know that if they want to respond, they will. But if there's another key person in that person's life that's able to help rally all the people that want to help, that's super, super helpful, because then they're able to kind of coordinate the details of getting that person what they need. They can set up a meal train. I mean, I forget every day that my kids need to eat. I mean, I'm like 5 o'clock and I'm like, why is everybody acting crazy? So, when you're grieving or you're sick or whatever, having that taken off your plate is such a huge gift. So even something as simple as that person creating a meal train and sending it out and making sure that meals are coming to the family for the first 3 months after their child dies. To that point too, having that person organize a Starbucks run. If you know that person loves having a iced caramel macchiato every day, making sure that somebody is coming and swinging by and just dropping it off on the porch if that's what's most comfortable for them, or sending them a Starbucks gift card, however because people want to help. So if that's channeled in a way that's helpful for that person, it makes a really big difference. The other thing that I encourage people to do a lot is when a child dies, everybody shows up at the beginning. Everybody's there. Everybody's sending cards. Everybody is present to you for the first month, 6 weeks. And then everything starts trickling and falling back. And as everybody else is getting into this routine of their life, the world kind of forgets, but you don't forget. You're still in this state of, oh my gosh, what just happened to me? how do I continue to pick up these pieces and keep, that's a point where a lot of people are going back to work, where they're starting to reacclimate into life. And it's very difficult because they then are bombarded with questions from people that maybe don't know the whole story, or people are walking around them like eggshells because they don't want to say the wrong thing or do anything. When somebody's child dies, set a reminder for 6 months later and put on your calendar to write them a card and just let them know that you still remember that they're suffering and that their life has changed. That somebody did that to me, and that is the one card that I remember and I still have. And it meant so much to me. And we have made that a process in what we do and through ReViv. And that has come back from feedback that is one of the most supportive things that people receive is that reminder months afterwards that they're still struggling.
Maria, I hate to interrupt, but I've heard that kind of thing before. People seem to think that, and I can also tell you from my own experience, but people seem to think that 6 months later, they just want to move on. And if they were to send a card, that would be like reminding them of something they don't want to remember, or that it would be a bad thing. But everyone I've talked to, it's a good thing. They want to know that people haven't forgotten. They want to know that their child has not been forgotten. Right, that they're not the only person that still remembers their child. So a 6-month card, an anniversary card, I've only heard good things about doing that kind of thing, and not like, why do you keep reminding me? That's not the reaction, right, that you're going to get.
Well, because you don't wake up one day and be like, oh, I forgot my kid died. No, like you know that every day. You're walking with that every single day of your life. And it actually, and too, for people that feel uncomfortable about what to say, I will tell you, it's better to say something. It's better to say the child's name, because as a parent, you don't forget that your child died. You didn't give the child that name because you never want to hear it again. You're not going to hurt someone by saying something. The more hurt that someone would have is because you don't say anything. And so I always encourage people to say something, to do something more than what maybe you think is necessary, because, somebody can tell you that's too much, but nobody's going to tell you you aren't doing enough, right? Like nobody's going to come to you and they'll be hurt, but they won't come to you and tell you that. They'll be really hurt and they'll harbor that inside, but people let you know if it's too much. But I would always encourage people to err on the side of too much than not enough. And the other thing for people that are being the support through grief is allow yourself grace, because like I said, grief is not normal. Most of the world doesn't know how to handle it or how to be supportive for other people. So give yourself grace, but also put on a little bit thicker skin sometimes, because there's a lot of things that people feel and say and do while they're grieving that's not ever personal to you. Have a little bit thicker skin and know that you're doing your best while the person who's grieving is doing their best too. It's all a real grace game.
Well, thanks for talking with us today, for sharing your story on Vivian, the beauty of all life, no matter how short, and how we can all better reach out to those who experience this kind of loss. So thanks for spending time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed being on today, and hopefully it was meaningful for those who are listening. And also, if there's anyone who would need support, to please feel free to reach out to us through ReViv. My personal information is on our website, and we are more than happy to be a support as you walk through this journey.
And I want to thank all our viewers and listeners for tuning in on this episode of our Being Pro-Life series. Head to the website to view more resources talked about in this episode at www.catholicaoc.org/being-pro-life. Thank you for joining us today. I look forward to being with you next time.